Even though The Mask is a classic movie that surprisingly holds up incredibly well even by today's standards, and even though the movie was a great success, it has never really received all the credit it is due. And maybe that's because it was released in 1994 alongside films like The Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, or True Lies, or perhaps it's because of its light-hearted comedic screenplay, but The Mask just wasn't taken seriously enough, even though it pushed the limits of what is possible with VFX, and became the first film to have a photoreal 3D cartoon character using computer animation. So, with that in mind, let's pull apart some of those iconic scenes and see what really went into the VFX.
Let's rock this joint!
The Mask movie was loosely based on a comic of the same name, which in turn was based on the works of cartoonist legend Tex Avery. The works of Tex Avery were heavily referenced throughout the movie in various ways, with props, images, gags, and iconic movements. In fact, Avery's work was referenced so much that it actually became part of the look and personality of the Mask himself, and for the style of his visual effects. VFX artists at Industrial Light and Magic studied Tex Avery's work and began to build up a library of drawings and clips for use as reference material. ILM then did a photo shoot with Jim Carrey, to which their art department began manipulating his face to get an idea of how far they could go and how it would look. Now, combining 2D animations alongside live-action footage was nothing new. It had already been done before in Anchors Aweigh, Song of the South, Mary Poppins, and of course Who Framed Roger Rabbit, to name a few. But combining live-action footage with photoreal 3D computer-generated cartoon characters and having them interact with each other had never been done before. And this meant everything had to be carefully thought through, planned and choreographed. The actors had to know where the CG action was going to take place in shots like these, where the mask transitions from VFX to live action and back to VFX. Jim could then be shot separately and composited later. Every spin had to have its path mapped, so the camera knew how to frame it, and the special effects team knew which prop had to fall over or move, in which direction it should fall, and when. The director also had to give the visual effects the room they needed within the shot itself. For example, in this scene they replaced Milo's head with a larger CG one, but this meant that the actors had to know exactly where that head would be for any interactions, like this one where Milo bites the henchman in the butt. Here they had to hang an inner tube off his trousers to allow Milo to bite it and leave a space for the bigger head. Jim also had to allow for the extra VFX space in various other scenes, like here when he removed Milo's mask, here when he had to keep Milo at a distance to allow for the bigger CG head and for the CGI tongue to lick his face, here when he first puts on the mask and covers his head, he had to allow for the thickness it would have as he scratched his fingers along it, and in this scene that was inspired by Tex Avery's Red Hot Riding Hood. Here, Jim had to allow for the CG wolf's head when whistling. Jim's head was then removed and replaced with a CG wolf's head, which started as a wire frame that was animated, and then CG skin was added and then composited into the final shot. The necessity for this detailed planning is perhaps most apparent in the landlady shotgun scene. If we just quickly remove the CG elements from this scene, we can see that these explosions, bursting water pipes, and sparks all had to be choreographed to fit the CG animation that was going to be added later. For the mask bouncing around, they just shot Jim standing in front of a blue screen soundstage. They then stretched and shortened that image as he bounced off the walls and ceiling. Then they cut to a stuntman jumping out of a window, and then to this shot, which was actually shot in reverse, with Jim starting close up to the camera and being pulled away from the camera with a descender rig. And this tongue clacker was actually real. Real CGI, of course. Then he hits the road and flattens. This required a shot of a stuntman falling. Then Jim pulling himself up. Then a blue screen shot of Jim's front and Jim's back. That could all then be animated and composited into the final shot. And for all of you Mask fans who have reached this point of the video, thank you so much, and here's a fun fact that you may not know. The large prosthetic teeth that Jim had to wear for the mask were actually only intended for silent scenes. But thankfully Jim Carrey learnt how to talk whilst wearing them, which is just as well because it really does make the character.
Smokehead!